Hola, mi nombre es Xiomara Domínguez, tengo 37 años, tengo 2 hijos, soy madre soltera, nací en Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. Mi ocupación actualmente es, me dedico a Cleaning Services. Después me vine para acá, para Nuevo México, por las oportunidades que se supone que teníamos de trabajo. Tuve que trabajar por necesidad en el oil field. Aquí, la verdad, ha sido un poquito traumática porque jamás pensé estar en estas situaciones. Yo vengo de México, soy enfermera. Me gustaría también el poder tener una escuela donde pues no sé si se pueda hacer como que, pues yo tengo mi trabajo y no puedo dejar de trabajar para poder estar yendo a la escuela, porque si no trabajo, pues no pago renta, no les doy alimentación a mis hijos.
The fact that many of these workers just to make it to the month, to make their living, they have to work more than one job. So that makes it really, really difficult to access to training.
¿Qué es lo que necesita cambiar mi comunidad para trabajadores como yo? Pienso que primero que nada debe de haber el doble de inversión de lo que ya hay, ya que somos nosotros los mayores productores de este pueblo. Y me gustaría que hubiera más capacitación, más orientación. Yo luché por más dinero para que se crearan esos programas.
Was produced in partnership with Somos Un Pueblo Unido, an immigrant-led organization that creates leadership opportunities for immigrants and low-income workers. And we wanted to show that video before this session because we will be talking about how to make sure that we are centering workers and students in the policy solutions and in the advocacy work that we do. We know that when workers and learners have a seat at the table, our policies are stronger and more effective. And as people who are working to change policies and programs, we want to make sure that people who are most impacted by those programs have their voices heard, have their voices valued, and are positioned as decision makers. This is always important, but it's especially important at a time when many working class people feel overlooked in national and state policy debates. So I am thrilled to be joined by Rachel Korberg, the Executive Director of Family and Workers Fund, and by Saba Waheed, the Director of the UCLA Labor Center. Saba, I want to start with you because you've led the way in participatory research on the labor market. You've conducted research in partnership with low-wage workers. Tell us, what does that approach look like, and how does it sharpen what we actually know and understand about the labor market?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for this amazing summit. It's already been great. This actually bookends really nicely with the narrative change conversation we started the day off, because that's what we're trying to do, is tell a story. And so starting with research, it's not just participation of communities, we actually called it research justice. And the reason for that was that there actually is injustice, just like there's injustice in the environment and the economy, that even the terrain of research has a lot of inequities in terms of who gets access to research, who gets their stories told through research, and what happens with that research. So starting from that place of injustice is how we got to research justice. The number one principle being, who is the expert? So a lot of times the expert is up here and the community is over here, but starting with the baseline that actually the communities are the experts of the conditions that impact them. And they are the ones who we want to go listen to and talk to and be able to elevate that through the research process. So starting with the experts. Then the second is, like, now we start getting almost into a power analysis in terms of how to develop access to research. So there's a lot of research out there. There is data, there's databases, there's academic articles that it turns out you have to pay $100 to access. So what about all this research that's out there about the community that they don't have access to? So we kind of call that like communities' right to know. Like they need to know what's being said about them because policies are being made based on that research out there. The other side is what we say the right to be heard, is like not dismissing what's happening on the ground. Oh, that's happening to you? Oh, that's just you. And so dismissing, especially communities of color, poor communities, working class communities, in the way that they're, or young people, like the way that those voices are not heard. So let's just package it. Like I don't love research I don't love social science surveys, interviews for the sake of doing surveys. It's because it allows us to be able to tell a strategic story. So when you have 500 surveys and you say that 80% are experiencing something, it gives you power to talk to policymakers, to make them listen. So it's a way to not knock on the door, to break down that door. And so you have to hear what's going on. And then the last piece is the capacity to use research for change. So this isn't research to put on a shelf. It's not to necessarily just build the field. We're talking about being social change, policy change advocates with the data that we collect.
Amazing. So there's so much in that conversation that I'm sure we're going to come back to as we talk. And one of the things that I really appreciate that you lifted up is thinking about workers as experts. And so I want to come to you, Rachel, because Family and Workers Fund was created, right, to leverage public investments, deliver good jobs, and increase access to more inclusive public benefits. Mm-hmm. And when it was created, it's my understanding that you recognize that when it comes to advancing that vision, the true experts are working people and their families. So tell us, what does that mean to you? How have you engaged working people as leaders in that work as you've thought about, leveraging public funds with philanthropy?
Yeah, that is exactly right, Brooke. So we're a $130 million nonprofit fund. We bring together a very diverse group of funders, from corporations and banks like JP Morgan Chase to private foundations like the Ford Foundation. And what brings everyone together is this focus on building a better future for working people and families. And we were created in the earliest days of the COVID-19 pandemic because of worker stories, because of worker experiences, and that has been a through line for us. So I'll share just two of them that are a big part of why we do what we do and how we've continued to work this way. And I want to acknowledge that they are heavy stories. The first was, I will never forget getting a phone call from a community-based organization that supported workers in the restaurant and hospitality industry. And if y'all remember the spring of 2020, as the pandemic was just beginning, she called me and said, Rachel, 90% of the workers who we support have been laid off in a 2-week period, 90%. And so many folks were not eligible for unemployment insurance and other benefits, or were really struggling to access them, and the systems were not made to make it easy and clear for them. Then there was another set of stories that I was hearing, stories about workers often in healthcare or who are entering healthcare, making meals for hospitals, taking additional jobs that were deemed essential at the time to enable our country to continue on in a lot of ways and still have basic services and still have functioning hospitals. And for me, one of the many heartbreaks of that story is for the people in those jobs. Were they then able to go on and become RNs or to become managers after putting in so much over these years? But no, as we know, too often in these career pathways, even when you build all of this important critical experience in a time like a pandemic, there are these dead ends rather than ladders, rather than lattices. So those two stories, this idea that there is not a system that's working well enough to support you if you have a setback in your career, a setback that has nothing to do with you and has to do with the country going through a pandemic, and that all of this hard work, you can still hit these dead ends. That was a big part of why we created Families and Workers Fund as a grant maker, and those are really our two strategies today that we focus on. And that's why it was very natural that one of the first things we did was create something called the Essential Leaders Council. So this is a group of frontline workers, often in everywhere from minimum wage retail jobs to, Saba and I were just talking about this, workers who are doing disaster restoration and rebuilding homes after disasters like the LA wildfires. And they are on equal footing as our funder advisory board. So all of those funders that come together in our organization, they weigh in on our strategy, on our grants, exactly on the same footing with the same level of power and authority in our organization is this group of Essential Leaders Council members.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, something that you're saying, and I want to ask you both a follow-up about this, is really about power and thinking about how we share power. Those of us who are in policy work, those of us who are in advocacy work, those of us who are practitioners and who are in philanthropy, how do we share power with the people who we are working on behalf of? And I've noticed as a social sector leader for myself, I've sometimes had to question my own assumptions and assumptions of others about research and expertise. And what I think about research and expertise, and I've needed to question those assumptions to be able to position working people as decision makers and to share that power. And so I know a lot of people in the room are thinking about this, and I'm curious to hear from you all. How have you adapted either your leadership practices or the systems that you're working in to authentically share space with and learn from workers?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think you just hit it when you're saying it's about power. And that's part of the research justice framework is to really ensure. So it's one thing to say we're gonna have workers in the room. It's another thing to make sure that they are fully empowered in that process. And so what does that look like? It's making sure that you're giving them the tools, the capacity, the resources to be able to come into that room and participate fully. Like some of my early research days, you'd go, you'd see these charts with little colors on them and then expect maybe workers who have never looked at a chart before or that kind and expect them to be able to synthesize what they've heard. So our thing was create infographics, create different ways, whether it's interactive activities or popular education so that there is some real engagement, and then use that data. So once, you've had access to that data, then use it to talk about solutions. So bringing in the key stakeholders at the front end in terms of what do we need to know, why are we asking these questions, what are we trying to get, bringing them in the middle, whether it's data collection, but then also being able to view data. So we'd have workers say I've been asked to do so many surveys, but nobody brings me back into the room to actually look at the data and then be able to look at it in a meaningful, engaged way. And so once you're in there, now that you're empowered, you can talk about here is what I see are the problems. Here we are seeing wage gaps. Here we are seeing training gaps. Here we're seeing we're not getting the people we're trying to reach, but you're having the folks themselves in the room. So what are the solutions? And so then they're in the room talking about, are we talking about policy here? Are we talking about information awareness? Are we talking about more outreach? Are we talking about a strategy? But all that happens because we've built the structure for engagement throughout the process.
For sure. And I know that building that structure, and we're going to talk in a moment about our Student Advisory Council, it takes intention, it takes capacity, it takes resources. And so, Rachel, what has it meant for you all as a philanthropy to build your Essential Leaders Council?
Yeah, I love this question because I think we don't talk enough about just the doing of this, right? I think at this point, 2025, I hear so much interest from workforce leaders in creating these structures, but how do you do it? And I love that you use the term shared space because for me, that has been our North Star. We've had this Essential Leaders Council, and they're in space together. And then we have our Funder Advisory Board, a group of more experts with more technical or traditionally recognized expertise they're in a space together. What does it look like to bring these two groups together and to share that space? And we're all weighing in on decisions. We're all influencing, millions of dollars in grants. So we were building towards that for a while. Of course, supporting our Essential Leaders Council members in getting familiar with the way philanthropy carries out its business, a grant docket, a strategy deck. These are the materials, making space for them to weigh in. Scheduling, this is a small thing, but scheduling meetings at a time that works for their hours, which is often different hours than what works for our foundation leaders or some of our technical experts. So we were building towards this, and now it was about 2 years ago that we did our first meeting, our joint advisory board meeting, bringing both groups together. And it was interesting. I will say, to your point about your own leadership, I really had to manage myself not to make it overly scripted because I just wanted it to go well. I really felt like this was such an important way for us to work. But I knew that some things were going to happen that were unexpected. So one of those things that happened, one of our Essential Leader Council members calls in, and he comes late to the meeting. He says, "I'm sorry I'm late. I just finished picking strawberries in the field." And then he shares some thoughts on our strategy and what could be helpful for farm workers. After the meeting, one of our foundation leaders pulls me aside and says, "I really appreciated what he said. It's got me questioning some of what we're doing in our upskilling work. But when he said, 'I just finished picking strawberries,' was that a metaphor?" And I said, no, he picked strawberries. He's a farm worker. He really just came from a strawberry field to this meeting. And it was just such a great and helpful moment for me to see just what wildly different worlds and sets of assumptions we were bringing these two groups together, and how a lot of times we think about the capacity building and support for the workers, but actually we need to think just as much about the capacity building and support for those that have that more traditional, professional, or technical expertise in this space. So I'm happy to share that we just had our first on-site at the end of last year, bringing these two groups together. And at this point, there's just been so much relationship building, more connection with each other, that there was laughter, people were going out for drinks afterwards, like all the signs that I wanted to see that this was really starting to congeal as two groups that could share space together and do really good work together.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, we were talking beforehand about how building those relationships, building that trust, and being open to learning things that are not your experience or not your approach are absolutely essential to making all of this work, including for those of us who are in the position to set up this work and set up these structures. And so I love how we're thinking about making sure that as we set up these structures moving forward, we're not recreating power imbalances, but we're building and sharing power from the start. And with that, I'm going to end with a final question, which is, we have a number of practitioners and advocates in the room, as you all have heard this morning. What advice would you give to folks who are looking to engage workers as they design research or as they design workforce programs or their advocacy strategies? What are some of the things that you would advise folks to do?
Actually building off this last thing that you just said, Rachel, around the process is so important. If you look at it just as the deliverable, like at the end, like you just want this data, you're gonna miss all these opportunities of points of contact. So like keeping that in mind is like, what are the points of contact? So one thing is like research is here, my day-to-day is here. They don't have to be. Like what are ways that you're already talking to workers that could incorporate a research process? And not so much like thinking about, oh, I need to get information from this person, but like what is a story we're trying to tell together? And if we tell it together, it will be more powerful that we can then use in order to push something, push whatever policy or program that you want to, or narrative that you want to push forward. What does that look like? Like, what does it look like if you look at yourself as the agents of change and the workers that you're engaging as a key partner in that process? So like even just kind of starting from that point, in terms of like developing a research project, in terms of like all those tools, those are skills that can be learned, as we all know, as skills builders. There's a way to get capacity come to the labor center, come to your local university, who understands the partnership that you're trying to build, and think about what it means to, when you're talking to a worker, here is a way for us to leverage a story, to make it more visible, to think about like what could be helpful for your organization, and then building the research process to really bring that up and to use it collectively. And then maybe it's like this Workforce Development Board with 5 others around the state, and you're engaging workers all across. So there's a strategy around that too. But always starting with this question is like, what is the story that needs to be told, about my work, and the workers that, like, what do we need to be telling together? What is our points of power? Is this something that you're trying to do on the city level, on the county level, on the state level, on the federal level? Because that will shift how you want to move the research project. And then really engaging in what is the process in terms of actually making this happen and keeping it ground up so the right folks are in the room to help you co-design it.
I love that. A few tips, and I will say we are very much learning as we go. There's a lot of ways we really want to do more, and we want this to work better in philanthropy. So sharing this as a fellow learner and traveler in this with you, the first is just start somewhere. One of the things I have found is we've built up the idea of working in this way so much, and we're so worried, I find, about doing something that could be tokenizing or not a good experience for the folks we're bringing into the room. And those worries are right, and I share them. And just start somewhere. It doesn't have to be a 200-page manual on human-centered design and a 2-year process. Just get started, and even if it's just in one specific project to begin. The second is money. Compensate people for their time and for doing this. And this is expertise. The way we acknowledge expertise is money. Thank you for that. Money deserves the applause line. The third is where you can build these types of structures in where people are working together, right? We're a funder collaborative, so there's a lot, we're touching 20 different foundations that are exposed to this group versus it just being with one. So where you can, find those points where collective action is happening, embed these participatory shared power ways of working there. And then the last one I would say, which is gonna sound a little cheesy, but I've realized the more we go is kind of the most important. This work moves at the speed of trust, and trust is built over time and through real relationships with each other. So making sure it's not just about the meeting, but it's also about what happens after the meeting and how we're speaking to each other, and really creating a space where everyone who's participating can share fully and openly.
Absolutely. And, hearing both of you speak, if we're positioning workers and students as decision makers and sharing power at the front end, then to your point, Rachel, we're designing together, and that takes a little bit of the pressure off of getting it right, even as we're doing that in a thoughtful, intentional way. So thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge. So as Saba and Rachel exit the stage, we're going to set up another chair, and then we are going to have the second part of this plenary join. Let me tell you a little bit about the second part of this plenary as we do that. So, Michael, how long? It's been a little over a year, probably like 18 months. Sorry, my sense of time and place has never come back post-pandemic, right? But NSC decided that we wanted to be in this space. And to Rachel's point about starting somewhere, we decided to start a student advisory council. So our student advisory council is made up of 8 students who advise us on our policy and our research, who engage with us in advocacy. My colleague, Lindsay Reichland-Cruz, who's here, released an amazing report that elevates all of their expertise called What Students Need and Want. Check it out on our website. But I would like to invite my colleague, Michael, and the panelists up now so that we can talk more about what that work looks like for us. So let's welcome them to the stage. I'll just give folks a moment to get settled here. You can be in the middle. So let me introduce who we have here. And I should say, I think, Michael, right, all of our student advisors are here at the summit, right? Or nearly all of our student advisors. So they're participating in the summit, but we have Rachel Wilkerson here to my immediate left, who's on our Student Advisory Council. We have my colleague Michael Richardson, who's our Director of Worker and Student Voice. And then we have T.T. Martinez, who is also on our Student Advisory Council. Let's welcome them again to the Skills Summit. So Rachel, I want to start with you. Can you share a bit about your journey? What brought you to your training program, your post-secondary program, and what motivated you to get involved in the Student Advisory Council? And then TT, I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Sure. So I started this journey probably back in 2007. I went off to college. I wasn't really serious at the time. I was kind of just feeling it out. I'm originally from Florida, and so when I came back home, my dad was like, you got two options. Either you're going to go to school or you're going to go to work, but you're not going to be at home and not do anything.
My husband got the same two options.
Yeah. So I enrolled in a community college, Seminole State College now, but I had the opportunity to do the CNA program where they trained us in 3 areas of patient care tech, residential care, and home health care as well. So I had the opportunity to work at home, in the nursing home, and also in the hospital. From there, I started working. I was going back to school. I said, I think I really like this patient care, and I wanted to do nursing. So around 2014, after I'd done that for a while, I'd worked 7 years in the hospital. I moved to New Orleans to take care of my uncle, who was sick, and after he had had his surgery, he was like, I want you to stay, and I want to help you finish college. And I was like, okay. So I went home, I packed up my apartment. I was like, I'm gone. I'm going to try this new thing out. And a year after living there, he passed because he had cancer. So we didn't really understand how bad it was, but I kind of had to make a pivot and figure out where I was going to go. So a year after living in New Orleans, I ended up having a baby. 1 pound, 3.8 ounces. I had her at 28 weeks. She's going to be 9 in June. She's thriving. Yep. So yeah, she's doing very well, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any of the tools. I had to lean on the college that I was going to there to really help me. And that's when I started finding those challenges like, oh my gosh, I have a baby, I have to work. My family lives in Florida, that's 8 hours away. I had no support system. I had to kind of create a support system. A lot of the programs at the college I attended, they were able to find housing, help me with, food stamps, WIC. These are the next steps you need to take. You need to, apply for disability. So they kind of helped me work through that. And fast forward to 2022, I ended up graduating with my bachelor's in organizational management. And so, thank you. And I was able to start working. So from there, I had the opportunity, actually the director of TRIO that I was in, she actually said, hey, there's this opportunity through NSC, and I was like, what's that? And I read it, and I was like, well, I guess I kind of follow those guidelines, because throughout the time as I was there, I was a student worker, I was working with at-risk youth, so there were a lot of stuff that I was doing, and I was able to really connect with the students because I understood their struggle. I wasn't able to become a nurse because I had to go to school, I had to work, I had to feed my baby, and provide. So with that, I had to make a pivot. And, there was a lot of things like, man, I wish there was a night program for nursing, I found out that the school is now receiving funding, and they're going to have a night track. So those small little things, seeing that, it's like, wow, that gives them the opportunity, just those small things, how important it is for us. So, I just took the leap of faith, and it's been awesome ever since.
And I so appreciate how you're using both the training that you received, your professional expertise, and your personal expertise, both in your day-to-day work at your college, but also utilizing that and lending it to us at National Skills Coalition to help inform and change policies. So TT, let's come to you. Tell us about your journey to training and what made you want to participate in the Student Advisory Council.
So my story is a little eccentric. I started back in 2009. I ended up dropping out, couldn't complete my GED. I was struggling a lot with substance abuse issues and just criminal charges, and I was just in a really bad spot in my life at that point. Fast forward to 2019, I tried again. I was actually just moved out here, and I just was finding no way to get into this GED structure. I couldn't figure out how to get in there. I couldn't maneuver things the way I needed to, so I ended up backing down. In 2020, I was sitting at home. It was literally my birthday. I was sitting there, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. I was talking to my husband, who's here today, all the support in the world that he's given me, you know, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. He left. He went to go get food for us and the kids. As he's gone, I'm watching the news. The news pops up. There's this guy there. He's from the South Side. He's done what I did. He's been in gangs. He's been, you know, he had all the same issues as me. And he said, you know what? Today was my day, and I had to go and I had to restart my life. He goes, I had to give myself a chance. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up figuring out, going through Pima.edu. So I'm a student at Pima Community College. And
we're big Pima Community College fans here.
And I just started going to classes. I got my GED. Within 4 months, I was actually one of the fastest students there. I grabbed it, I went with it, I rolled with it. I had really great instructors and a really great support system there. I still do. My delegate is here, and she's like, yeah, go, you got this. And I'm like, no, I don't, but I do, and I know I do. And I know that, like, I enjoy advocacy. Coming into, like, 2021, Adult Ed actually approached me, and they said, hey, we need a student senator. We need a rep for the students in adult education. We don't have anyone talking for us in the student senate. That was the first leap of faith that I took. I ended up being a student senator for 2 years, and it was the greatest thing ever because I got to talk to a different group of students, different group of students that were going through different issues and that I could help them with. Yes. And in turn, I ended up getting an email from one of my instructors, Jenny Ryan, and she said, hey, there's an opportunity with this place called National Skills Coalition. I'm going to get you in contact with Michael. And I'm like, okay, cool, like, let's try it. Like, I didn't know what was gonna happen. I didn't know that it was gonna turn out into this, but I'm so glad that I took this leap of faith because I have many resources to help people with. Throughout my life, having to find resources and having to find things to help me afford rent, to afford food, how to get to a food box place, how to get food dropped off and delivered to my house, or the spot that I was camping out in. All of those resources I was able to utilize as a student senator and give it to other students, and I was actually able to help them get food and get sustainability and find out how to pay their rent and how to do things because I had these resources. I said, I can continue to do this. I can continue to help them and advocate for them because that's who I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for the new traditional student. Yes. I'm fighting for us because I know that we have promise and that we can, you know, contain this hope. Like, we have hope. Yes. It's just we have to have somebody else have that hope in us. Yes. That we're going to change our lives, that we're going to do better. Yes. So I'm just glad to be here, and I'm glad that, you know, I took this leap of faith, and I love everybody here, you know, just for the support and the motivation you give us.
Talk about leadership and sharing power. The way that you're sharing the power that you've developed with your fellow students is giving me motivation and giving me energy. So thank you for sharing that. And Michael, I want to bring you into the conversation because TT was like, yeah, they said to talk to this guy, Michael, right? So Michael and I have worked together for like years, right? Like probably, what, 8 years now? Yeah. And Michael and I have been dreaming about this for years and years together. And so tell us, Michael, what led you to create the Student Advisory Council? What gaps did you see in NSE's policy advocacy that you hoped it would fill?
Yeah, to your point, I think we, for years, have been thinking about how we wanted to bring in workers and learners into the organization. We like to call ourselves NSE Network of Networks. Everyone in this room is you make us who we are. One thing that was missing from that conversation and not contributing to that network was workers and learners. We kind of we had done some things in the past before, but we hadn't really develop space for workers and learners to really be a part of the network. And it's something we've talked about for years. And then we finally just did it. To your point earlier, we just kind of did something. We started off with some exploratory conversations with a lot of folks in this room, learning about how to engage workers, how to engage learners, what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to make sure that we include if we were to take this route. And then we kind of did that for about a year. And then we were like, we wanted to move intentionally and not try to grow too fast. So we decided that an advisory council could be the best kind of vehicle to do that. It's a way that we can kind of create community within that council, build relationships, build that trust that was talked about earlier with a smaller group of folks. And then also just to be able to provide opportunities for them to amplify their voice, to advocate for policy, and to inform policy. So that's how we kind of developed the advisory council as a way to do that in a controlled environment that we could continue to nurture. And originally it was supposed to be a 1-year advisory council, but we loved them so much. And we knew we needed more time with them for that trust, to build trust. So we decided it could be a 2-year program so that we could kind of continue the relationship, continue to build skill sets around advocacy and policy with this group of folks. So that's kind of how we got started.
Thank you. Yeah, and we have all kinds of dreams about our current advisory council being able to mentor new advisory council members in the ways that you were talking about.
One thing I'll add too,
Yeah.
we wanted to create the advisory council too as a way to inform policy. So through our Making College Work campaign, we had an opportunity to work with our research team. I'm looking at Lindsay because she's right on my keyboard right here. And kind of figure out what it looks like for NSC to work with a group of folks to inform policy and then advocate around the policies that they actually recommended. So we saw that opportunity and then developed around it.
So Rachel, my understanding is you went to the Hill last year. You're going to go to the Hill on Wednesday, right? So how did your involvement in the advisory council shape your understanding of how you can advocate with elected officials? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't even know it was possible.
Yeah.
I thought that you had to graduate with your MPA, you had to have like all of these things. I didn't think that someone like myself could just advocate. A lot of times we see our directors, we see a lot of executive leadership going in and saying, these are the policies that we're gonna make, or these are the decisions we're gonna make on classes, on how we're gonna deal with retention, how we're gonna deal with outreach. And one of the things Rachel said, and I was like, that's it. You need the voice, because you need to, before you can inform, you need to know what those barriers are. And a lot of times we make decisions without looking at the barriers, and it's kind of just a general overall, decision that's made. And so I was like, oh, I could do that? Me? Like, y'all sure? You want me up there? And then I was, and just, it was, you were starstruck, because it was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know, and NSC did such a great job in preparing us, letting us know this is what's gonna happen. This is how it's gonna be. Sometimes they may look like their eyes are glazing over. It's okay, it's not you, it just may be them. This may be their 10th meeting for the day. But understanding the landscape, and just, it really empowered me, because I'm like, oh, I can't stop now. There's more that I have to do. There's more people that I could talk to. There's more than just, doing it even. I don't have to even do it on a federal or a state level. I could do it at a local level, something that small. So it really helped empower. I was really happy when y'all decided to hang with us for 2 years, because I'm like, good. You're not going to be able to get rid of us that easy. But it was empowering, and it was just really exciting because then I was able to tell my daughter, this is what we did. And when you get older, don't let your voice be stifled because you can use your voice now. This is what it is. You can speak up for people now. She does that now at 8. I'm like, calm down, relax. You know, she wants to advocate for all. You know, her best friend is autistic. And so she's very intentional at things that are happening. If she notices something, she's like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. This is, you know, so I love that. So starting from there and being able to share that with just my child or with my husband or, you know, my parents. My dad's like, you did what? I'm like, I know, right? He's like, I didn't know you could do that. So it's amazing to just be a part of that and to have that voice to feel empowered.
Thank you. And TT, I want to ask you the same thing, right? This morning you all had a session. You did some prep, right? Is my understanding with congressional staff to talk with them about some of the research we've done and what you're going to take to the Hill. What's your experience been like? What made you feel like you wanted to step into an advocacy role?
I think with me, it's my son is autistic as well, so he does, you know, there's a lot of things that people, you know, do at school towards him or say towards him that I'm not agreeable with. There's a lot of things that were happening at Pima as well that I wasn't agreeable with, that I was like, I'm gonna stand my ground and we're gonna get change, and I don't care what anyone has to say, I'm gonna keep saying it until I beat a dead horse, you know, like I'm gonna keep doing it. And it was like, a lot of my responses were actually positive, so I actually started getting things done, and I actually started seeing change at the school, and I started seeing teachers change, and I started seeing more of the, you know, instructors and the facility of the staff, you know, they were all just really attentive to what we had to say now. Now they were listening to us, and now they weren't just ignoring, or it wasn't like they were ignoring, but like they weren't just pushing it to the side and, oh, we can take care of this later. It was more of a, we can deal with this now because it's such a small issue, we can just help the students now. And so a lot of that, like, it led me to just be like, I can advocate. I can use my voice for positive things instead of arguments and fights and, you know, getting in trouble. I can literally use my voice to change stuff. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned going to the Hill last year as well, was like, I was sitting there and I'm in Raul Grijalva's office and I noticed he doodles when he's on the phone. I do the same exact thing. I'm like, this is where I belong then. It's been my goal to just advocate and get people treating each other like we need to, you know, just to create peace on earth. That's one of my biggest things, is just, we can all get along. We just have to learn how to get along with each other and understand what each other, you know, policies and things that we want to change. There's a lot of us in here that have the same story or the same background or the same reasoning that why we're here. So guess what? We can all talk together and get together and advocate with each other. That's the biggest thing.
That's right. I'm right there with you on it. As I said this morning, like, I feel that that's National Skills Coalition's superpower, to bring together all of these really powerful experiences and perspectives and channel that into a collective voice for a common agenda. So you said it better than I did this morning. I could be up on this stage talking to the three of you all day, and we are near time. So I'm going to close out with a question that I'd like each of you just to take 1 minute to answer. Which is like, why is it important for those who are making policies to hear from students and workers? And how is the work that we're doing with the Advisory Council making NSC more impactful as an organization?
So I feel like it's very important for policymakers and us to make decisions together. We should always, you know, there should always be a rhyme or reason, because I actually have a very good instance was when I visited Miss Justine Watsack over in Arizona at the State Capitol building a few years back when I first became a student senator. And I was sitting in her office, and she was going to create a change where they were going to deduct money from the community colleges. So they're going to take money from us, and they were going to localize it somewhere else. And I remember I looked at her and I said, I'm just going to share my story. That's what they said. You got 5 minutes, less than that, who knows, just share it. And everything I said that day changed her mind. I know for a fact we can change their minds if we use our voices, if we don't back down from what we have to say. You say what you say, you don't hold it back, and you don't cry about it. You just say it. If they don't like it, oh well. You know, I mean, at the same time, you might change their mind. You literally might make them think, wait, why am I doing this? I was just in their shoes a few years ago, struggling to pay for college, struggling to do this, struggling to do that. You can literally change their mind with just something that you say. You just have to use your voice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michael, how about for you?
That's a good question. I mean, It's powering the people. I mean, I come from an organizing background. I did a lot of organizing work earlier on in my career. So I always believe that it's always rooted in the people, and that we have to create platforms and opportunities and supports and resources for folks to be able to tell their stories, share their experiences, and put forth solutions. These are the folks that are actually going through the policies that we're talking about every day. So there's no truer expert of these issues than the people that are actually going through it. You can't create policy about us without us. So I think that's the theory that we're going through at NSC, and we're still learning and trying to figure out how to live by that. But I think it'll make us better as an organization to center the voices of the folks who are impacted by the policies that we advocate for, that we're here in this room to advance, and will kind of shift us into that direction, and make us more authentic and honest about the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And not to mention coming up with probably even better policy solutions than we already have, for sure. I'm right there with you. Rachel, you're going to close us out. Why do you think it's important for policymakers to listen to students, and how does that make organizations like us more impactful?
Because it really, how can I say it? No, I'm going to say when you remove the barriers and when you address the barriers, you get the success that you want.
That's right.
So if our goal is to have a skilled workforce, then we need to listen to the problems and see how we can support. Most students, I was an advisor. I would say, what are your issues? Mm-hmm. And I'd say, okay, well, I can address this, I can help you, I can route you. And when you see that, you see the success of the student, because not only is it financial, it's mental. Their mental health is also a part of it. Mm-hmm. So NSC does a great job at telling us, tell us everything you want, whatever you want, however it looks, and then we can kind of piece back there. We all know that we can't just wake up and have $1 million in our bank account. I mean, it would be great, but we can't. So being able to really listen to the voice, look at the policy, see how it works, you're going to get more success. You just have to support those, and that buy-in, having the buy-in and having people, trust you. You guys have been so solid on what you say you're going to do. We trust you implicitly. And I think I could say that for the rest of the staff, our council. We trust you because you guys follow through, and that's so important. And so when others hear and believe and trust that what you say is going to happen, you're going to have a better workforce. You're going to have, students who are successful because they know that when times are hard or when there's a crisis, they know who they can turn to, and that person will help them navigate that instead of, just saying, I can't, there's no help, I have to do it on my own. Mm-hmm. So
thank you.
That's it.
Wow. I don't know about you all, but I am walking away from this feeling energized, inspired, and like I have a lot to think about as we go into our day tomorrow. So I'm going to close this out by thanking these three amazing people. And by thanking Rachel and Saba, and thanking all of you for joining us today. We are going to start back here tomorrow morning with breakfast in the ballroom. We'll have another full day to continue conversations like the ones we've had today, and hope everybody is able to recharge and connect with folks tonight, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Thank you. Woo!